My life was a museum of quiet order. Each object in my apartment had its designated place, a specific coordinate on the map of my solitude. The 3 gray coffee mugs hung from their hooks in descending order of use. The stack of design books on my coffee table was perfectly aligned, their spines forming a neat, monochromatic block. My work as a graphic designer allowed for this curated existence, a world built of grids and vectors, where every variable could be controlled. I worked from home, my desk facing a window that looked out onto a brick wall, a view that offered no surprises. The silence of my days was a comfortable, if somewhat chilly, blanket, punctuated only by the predictable hum of the refrigerator and the gentle click of my mouse. I had mistaken this carefully constructed loneliness for peace. I had convinced myself it was a fortress, not a cage. Then Alex arrived, and the walls of my museum began to tremble. He was my best friend Liam's older brother, a man who had existed only on the periphery of my life, a collection of anecdotes and blurry photos from family gatherings. Now, due to a plumbing disaster in the apartment he was renovating, he was my temporary house guest. He stood in my doorway, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, and he didn't just enter my apartment. He seemed to displace the very air within it. He was tall, with shoulders that seemed to strain the fabric of his simple gray t-shirt, and he carried with him the scent of the outside world, of sawdust, fresh rain, and something fundamentally clean, like Irish spring soap. It was a scent that didn't belong among my carefully chosen minimalist candles that smelled of sandalwood and vague concepts like solitude. "Hey, Ben. Thanks again for this," he said. His voice was a low rumble, a sound that didn't just enter my ears but seemed to vibrate through the floorboards, settling deep in my chest. It was the kind of voice that could calm a storm or start one. He dropped his bag by the door, and the sound echoed in the stillness. It was a chaotic intrusion, a disruption to the carefully balanced ecosystem of my home. I watched him, my heart performing a strange, unfamiliar rhythm against my ribs. This was Alex, the man I had secretly cataloged for years, the unattainable subject of my most private, foolish daydreams. The barrier between us was not one thing, but a series of interlocking, electrified fences. He was Liam's brother, first and foremost, a sacred territory I would never dare to cross. To do so would be a betrayal of the purest friendship I had. And then there was the larger, more obvious wall. Alex was, as far as I knew, completely and utterly straight. I'd heard Liam mention his girlfriends over the years, a string of names and faces that solidified his place in a world I could only observe. He was a guest in my home, a temporary variable in my otherwise constant equation. He was a living, breathing sculpture placed in the center of my museum, magnificent and untouchable, a stark reminder of everything I wanted and could not have. A sign that read, "Do not touch." The first few days were a study in hyper-awareness. My quiet fortress had become a shared space, and I was a nervous curator, constantly aware of the magnificent, unpredictable visitor roaming the halls. I learned the small details of his existence with an almost painful intensity. He drank his coffee black, leaning against the kitchen counter in the morning light, his silhouette a stark, powerful shape against the pale yellow of the wall. The sound of his shower was a low, steady rush of water that seemed to fill the entire apartment. He moved with a quiet economy, a physical confidence that I, with my anxious, indoor energy, could only marvel at. His presence made my small apartment feel both impossibly crowded and wonderfully full. I would sit at my desk, pretending to adjust color palettes and align text boxes, but my focus was fractured. My senses were tuned to him. I could hear the soft thud of his bare feet on the hardwood floor, the quiet sigh he let out as he settled onto the couch with a book, the low murmur of his voice on the phone. Each sound was a data point, a piece of him that I collected and stored away in the secret archives of my mind. I was a cartographer mapping a foreign land I would never be allowed to explore. I admired him from a distance, the way one admires a painting, appreciating the form and the color and the raw emotion it evokes, all while knowing you can never feel the texture of the canvas. The space between us was a few feet of empty air, but it felt like a chasm, wide and unbridgeable. I told myself it was for the best. Order was safe. Desire was chaos. And I had built my entire life around avoiding chaos. Then, one Tuesday morning, chaos kicked down the door. The bathroom was my last true sanctuary, the only room he had not yet fully infiltrated. The steam from the shower was a thick, warm fog, blurring the edges of the world and muffling the sounds of the apartment. It was a sensory deprivation chamber where I could be alone with the sound of the water drumming against the tile, the scent of my eucalyptus shower gel, and the rhythm of my own breathing. It was the one place I felt completely private, completely unobserved, completely safe. The door had a faulty lock, a minor annoyance I'd been meaning to fix for months, but never had. It was a small crack in my fortress, one I never imagined would be breached. I was rinsing the shampoo from my hair, water streaming over my face, my eyes closed against the sting. The world was reduced to warmth and sound, and the slick feel of the water on my skin. And then, a new sound. A soft creak. My eyes snapped open. The shower curtain was translucent, turning the world outside into a series of blurry, indistinct shapes. But one shape was new. It was large, dark, and standing in the doorway. My heart seized, a cold knot of panic in my chest. The door, which I had pulled shut, was now ajar, and the shape was unmistakably human. It was him. He hadn't slammed the door. He hadn't made a sound of surprise or apology. He just stood there, a silhouette frozen in the threshold. For a second that stretched into an eternity, the world stopped. The only sound was the frantic pounding of my own heart against the roar of the water. My entire body felt exposed, vulnerable, pinned by a gaze I couldn't see. My mind scrambled, trying to form a sentence, a sound, anything to break the spell. Then he moved. But he didn't retreat. He took a hesitant step into the bathroom, his form becoming clearer through the fogged-up curtain. I could see the dark shape of his head, the broad line of his shoulders. My breath hitched. What was he doing? He reached out, his hand pushing past the edge of the shower curtain into my sanctuary. The air that followed his hand was cool against the steam. I flinched back, pressing myself against the cold tile of the far wall. His hand wasn't reaching for me. It was reaching for something on the small shelf next to the shower head. His fingers, long and capable, brushed against the plastic bottle of my shampoo before closing around the bar of soap sitting in a dish. He just needed the soap. It was a simple, logical explanation that did nothing to calm the frantic storm inside me. He could have waited. He could have knocked. He could have done 100 other things that didn't involve walking in on me while I was at my most vulnerable. But he hadn't. He had walked in, paused, and then deliberately entered my space. His hand retreated, taking the soap with it. He mumbled something, his voice thick and low, barely audible over the water. It sounded like, "Sorry, forgot mine." Then he was gone. The door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the steam, my body trembling. The water continued to pour down, but it no longer felt warm. It felt cold, and I felt stripped bare in a way that had nothing to do with being naked. The lock on the door wasn't the only thing that was broken. The unspoken rules, the careful boundaries, the safe distance I had meticulously maintained, it had all been shattered in a single, silent moment. The curator had just watched the visitor step over the velvet rope and touch the art. And the terrifying part, the part that left me breathless and shaking, was that a secret, traitorous piece of me had wanted him to. The aftermath was a thick, suffocating silence. The air in the apartment, once just air, was now charged with the memory of that moment. It clung to the furniture and pooled in the corners of the rooms. When I finally emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, my skin scrubbed raw, the apartment was empty. A note was on the counter, scrawled on a napkin in his strong, slightly messy handwriting. Went to grab some things for the site. Be back later. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just normal. And that was somehow worse. It made the event feel surreal, a fever dream I had cooked up in the steam. But the soap dish next to my shampoo was empty. It had happened. When he returned that evening, the space between us had transformed. It was no longer a simple chasm of respectful distance. It was a minefield of unspoken tension. We navigated the small kitchen like two magnets with the same polarity, repelling each other, careful not to get too close. The simple act of making dinner became a complex, awkward dance. "Do you, want me to chop the onions?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. He wouldn't look at me, his gaze fixed on the cutting board. "I've got it," I said, my own voice tight. My hyper-awareness had escalated into a full-blown sensory assault. I was no longer just noticing him. I was consumed by him. His scent, sawdust, and that clean soap, my soap, seemed to have permanently infused the air. When he sat on the couch, I could feel the faint warmth he left behind on the cushions when he got up to get a glass of water. I could hear the sound of his breathing from across the room, a slow, steady rhythm that seemed to be the new metronome of my life. Every mundane detail was now loaded with a terrifying significance. Later, as we were putting the dishes away, our hands brushed as we both reached for the same cabinet handle. It was the briefest of contacts, skin against skin for no more than a second, but a jolt of pure electricity shot up my arm. It was like a static shock, sharp and startling, leaving a trail of heat in its wake. I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned. He did the same. "Sorry," he muttered, his eyes darting away, finding a sudden, intense interest in the kitchen faucet. "It's fine," I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. We sat on the couch to watch a movie, the cushions between us a vast, empty expanse. But I could feel his presence like a physical weight, a gravitational pull I was fighting with every ounce of my being. Halfway through the film, there was a quiet, emotional scene. I risked a glance at him and found him already looking at me. Our eyes met in the dim light of the television screen. It was just for a moment, a fleeting connection, but it was long enough for me to see something in his expression I couldn't decipher. It wasn't pity or disgust. It was something quieter, more complex. Something that looked unervingly like curiosity. He looked away first, clearing his throat and shifting on the couch, breaking the spell. A few nights later, the fragile truce we had built was broken by something other than our own awkwardness. He was quiet, more so than usual. He picked at his dinner, his usual easygoing energy replaced by a heavy stillness. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than I'd ever seen them. "Everything okay?" I asked, the question feeling bold, intrusive. He looked up, seeming surprised that I had spoken. He managed a weak smile. "Yeah, just a long day. The contractor is an idiot," he sighed, pushing a piece of chicken around his plate. "And my ex called." The name of his ex-girlfriend hung in the air between us, a ghost at our dinner table. I knew her name, Sarah. Liam had mentioned her. They had been together for years. "Oh," was all I could manage. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. She's getting married." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "I guess I should be happy for her. We've been done for over a year. But it makes you think, you know?" He finally looked at me, his eyes searching mine for something. "About what you're doing. Where you're going. If you've made a total mess of things." It was the first crack in his confident facade. The capable, grounded man who could build things with his bare hands was suddenly adrift. He wasn't the untouchable sculpture anymore. He was just a person, with his own history, his own heartbreaks, his own quiet fears. And in that moment, the admiration I felt for him, the distant, artistic appreciation, began to curdle and transform into something else entirely. It became something deeper, more tender, a strange, fierce desire to somehow shield him from this invisible weight that was pressing down on him. I saw his vulnerability, and it didn't push me away. It pulled me in, with a force that terrified me. The storm broke on a Friday night. It had been threatening all day, the sky a bruised, purple-gray. By evening, the rain was coming down in sheets, lashing against the windows, and the wind howled like a wounded animal. We were trapped, the city outside dissolving into a blur of water and darkness. Then, with a flicker and a low groan, the power went out. We were plunged into an absolute, disorienting blackness. The comforting hums of the apartment died, replaced by the roar of the storm and the sudden, frantic beating of my own heart. "Whoa." Alex's voice came out of the dark, startlingly close. "You okay?" "Yeah, fine." I managed, my voice shakier than I wanted. "Candles. I have candles." I fumbled my way to the kitchen, my hands tracing the familiar lines of the countertops. I found the emergency candles and a book of matches. A few moments later, the apartment was filled with a soft, flickering glow. The candlelight danced on the walls, creating long, shifting shadows. It transformed the familiar space into something new, something intimate and ancient. The normal world, with its harsh electric lights and endless distractions, had fallen away. We were left in a small, warm bubble of light, surrounded by the storm. We sat on the floor, leaning against the couch, a few candles on the coffee table between us. The rain drummed a relentless rhythm on the roof. For a long time, we didn't speak, just listened to the storm. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was full, weighted. "I'm really sorry about the other day," he said finally, his voice a low murmur that barely rose above the rain. "In the bathroom. I was an asshole. I should have just, I don't know, waited." My heart stuttered. "It's okay," I said, looking at the flame of the nearest candle. "You needed the soap." I could feel him shake his head in the dark. "No, that was a stupid excuse. I don't know why I did that. I saw you, and I froze." He paused, and the weight of that pause was immense. "You're really beautiful, Ben." The words hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't breathe. My entire world tilted on its axis. He had said it. He had said the one thing I had never, in my wildest fantasies, allowed myself to imagine. I risked a look at him. His face, illuminated by the flickering candlelight, was serious, his eyes dark and intense. He was watching me, waiting. My carefully constructed walls, already fractured, crumbled into dust. He shifted, moving closer, the space between us shrinking until I could feel the heat radiating from his body. He smelled of rain and clean laundry and something that was just him. He slowly reached out, his fingers tracing a feather-light path along the back of my hand, which was resting on the floor between us. The touch was a question, a quiet, tentative offering. My mind was a screaming void, all thought obliterated by the sheer, overwhelming reality of his touch. I didn't pull away. I couldn't. Instead, I turned my hand over, my palm facing up, an invitation. He took it, his fingers laced with mine, his hand warm and strong and real. He watched my face in the candlelight, his expression unreadable but so incredibly intense. "Is this okay?" he whispered, his voice a raw, vulnerable thing. I couldn't find my own voice. I just nodded, a small, jerky movement. It was more than okay. It was everything. It was the end of the world and the beginning of a new one. He leaned in, his movements slow, deliberate, giving me every opportunity to stop him. The scent of him was overwhelming. I could see the small flecks of gold in his brown eyes. I could feel his breath, warm on my cheek. He paused, his lips just a fraction of an inch from mine, his eyes searching mine one last time. And then he closed the distance. The kiss was impossibly gentle at first. It was soft, hesitant, a question asked without words. It was the taste of rain and coffee and something I couldn't name. It was the feeling of his slight stubble against my skin, the warmth of his lips against mine. My mind didn't just go blank, it ceased to exist. There was only this feeling, this man, this moment suspended in time, surrounded by the storm. Then, as my fear finally gave way to a wave of pure, unadulterated longing, I kissed him back. The kiss deepened, becoming sure, hungry. His other hand came up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. I leaned into his touch, my own hands finding their way to his shoulders, gripping the soft fabric of his shirt as if he were the only solid thing in a collapsing universe. The dam inside me didn't just break, it was obliterated. Years of carefully repressed yearning, of quiet, lonely admiration, came rushing out in a tidal wave of emotion. This was chaos. This was the storm, not just outside, but inside me. And it was the most terrifying, most beautiful thing I had ever felt. My ordered life, my quiet museum, was officially in ruins. And as his lips moved against mine, I knew, with a certainty that shook me to my very core, that I never wanted to rebuild it. The morning after was brutal. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world that was washed clean and painfully bright. The power was back on. The cheerful, unforgiving light of day streamed through the windows, illuminating every speck of dust in the air and every ounce of my burgeoning anxiety. The intimate, candlelit world of the night before had vanished, leaving behind the harsh, clinical reality of a Saturday morning. He was already up when I emerged from my room, a ghost in my own apartment. He was dressed, standing by the kitchen counter, nursing a mug of coffee. The easy, physical intimacy of the previous night had evaporated, replaced by a silence so thick I felt I had to push my way through it. "Coffee's on," he said, his voice flat. He didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the street outside the window, as if it held the answers to the universe. My heart which had felt so full and alive just hours before, plummeted into the cold, dark pit of my stomach. This was it. The regret. The awkward morning after that I had read about, that I had seen in movies, that I had always dreaded. I poured myself a mug, my hands trembling slightly. I leaned against the opposite counter, the two of us forming a tableau of forced casualness, separated by a few feet of linoleum that now felt like a mile-wide canyon. The silence stretched, taut, and agonizing. My mind, my greatest tormentor, kicked into overdrive. The anxiety began as a low hum and quickly escalated into a screaming chorus of self-doubt. It was a mistake. Of course it was a mistake. He was vulnerable. His ex just got engaged. The storm, the darkness, it was just a moment of weakness, a fluke. He's straight. He was just lonely. And you, pathetic and desperate, you let him. You encouraged him. You've made him uncomfortable in your home. You've ruined everything. You haven't just lost this impossible dream. You've probably destroyed your friendship with Liam in the process. I spent the rest of the day in a self-imposed quarantine, locked in my office, staring at a blank design file on my screen. I told him I had a deadline, a lie that tasted like ash in my mouth. I couldn't face him. I couldn't face the pity or disgust I was sure I would see in his eyes. I replayed every second of the kiss, every touch, every word, analyzing it, dissecting it until it was meaningless. I tortured myself with the memory, twisting it from something beautiful into evidence for the prosecution in the case of my own foolishness. He left for work a little while later, a project site he had to check on even on a Saturday. He just poked his head into my office. "Hey, I'm heading out for a bit. Need anything?" His tone was light, too light. The forced normalcy of it was like a knife in my gut. "No, I'm good. Thanks," I said, not looking up from my screen. I heard him hesitate at the door for a moment before the front door clicked shut. The apartment was silent again, but it wasn't the comfortable, ordered silence I was used to. It was an empty, hollow silence, filled with the ghosts of what had happened and the specter of what was to come. When he came back that evening, the distance between us had solidified into a tangible wall. He was quiet, retreating into his phone, his headphones a clear signal that he did not want to be disturbed. He sat on the far end of the couch, his body angled away from me. Every small action was, to my paranoid mind, a confirmation of my deepest fears. He was pulling away. He was erasing last night. He was putting the art back behind the velvet rope and reinforcing the glass. The emotional chasm between us felt wider and more impossible than ever before. I felt a cold, familiar loneliness creep back in, colder and sharper this time because I had, for a few brief, beautiful hours, known what it was like to be warm. That evening, as I was pretending to read a book and he was pretending to scroll through his phone, he suddenly turned off the television that had been droning on in the background. The abrupt silence was deafening, a vacuum that sucked all the air from the room. My stomach clenched. I kept my eyes glued to the page of my book, the words blurring into meaningless shapes. "Ben." His voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a razor. I didn't look up. I couldn't. "We need to talk." There it was. The 4 words I had been dreading all day. The prologue to the rejection speech. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I braced myself for the blow, for the gentle letting down, for the "I was confused," and the "I hope we can still be friends." I finally forced myself to look at him. He was watching me, his expression serious, his jaw tight. He took a deep breath, like a man about to dive into cold water. "Last night," he started, then stopped, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I've been a complete mess today, and I'm sorry. I made you feel, I don't know, awkward. I didn't know what to say. This wasn't the opening I had expected. I need you to know," he continued, his voice gaining a bit of strength, his gaze unwavering. "That last night wasn't a mistake. Not for me. It was the most honest thing I've done in a very long time." I could only stare at him, my mind struggling to process the words, to believe them. "I've been thinking about you," he confessed, a faint flush creeping up his neck. "For a while now. Longer than I probably should have. Seeing you at Liam's parties, hearing him talk about you. I was nervous about staying here, to be honest, because I knew being this close to you would be difficult." He paused, and his eyes dropped for a second, a flicker of vulnerability crossing his face. "And the shower thing. God, I'm so sorry about that. I was an idiot. I heard the water running. I knew you were in there. I should have just walked away. But I stood there for a second, and then I panicked and grabbed the soap like some kind of creep. The truth is, I just wanted an excuse to be near you. And when I saw you, even just your silhouette, my brain just short-circuited. He was laying it all bare. Every assumption I had made, every fear I had nurtured all day, was being systematically dismantled by his quiet, earnest confession. My relationship with Sarah, he said, anticipating my unspoken fears. It was over long before it ended. We wanted different things. I think I've been questioning things for a long time. Who I am, what I want. And it wasn't some abstract idea. It was you. It was always you, in the back of my mind. I'm not some straight guy having a moment of confusion, Ben. I'm just a guy who is completely, terrifyingly into you. The dam broke inside me for the second time in 24 hours. But this wasn't the chaotic flood of desire. It was a warm, overwhelming wave of pure relief. It washed away the anxiety, the fear, the self-doubt, leaving me feeling clean and light and breathless. Tears I hadn't even realized were there pricked at the corners of my eyes. I thought I imagined it. I whispered, the words tumbling out, clumsy and raw. I thought you regretted it. I've been watching you for years, Alex. From a distance. I never, ever thought this. You being here has turned my whole world upside down. I was so scared I had ruined everything. A slow, beautiful smile spread across his face, a sunrise after a long, dark night. You haven't ruined anything, he said softly. You've just started something. He closed the distance between us on the couch, his movements sure and deliberate this time. He cupped my face in his hands, his palms warm against my skin. His thumbs gently wiped away the moisture from under my eyes. He looked at me, his gaze full of a tenderness that made my heart ache. I'm the one who should be scared, he murmured. You're the one who's turning my world upside down. And then he kissed me again. This kiss was nothing like the first. It wasn't tentative or questioning. It was certain. It was deep and sure, a statement of fact, not a query. It tasted of relief and promise and the end of a long, lonely wait. It was the feeling of a key turning in a lock I never knew I was trapped behind. It wasn't the chaos of a storm. It was the profound, quiet feeling of coming home. The first few days of our new beginning felt like learning a new language. It was a language of quiet touches and stolen glances, spoken in the hushed tones of a shared secret. We decided, for now, to keep it between us. The thought of telling Liam wasn't scary because we thought he'd disapprove, but because what we had felt so new, so fragile, that we wanted to protect it, to let it grow strong in the quiet space of my apartment before exposing it to the outside world. Our first date was simply cooking dinner together again, but the geography of my kitchen had been redrawn. Now, there was no invisible barrier. As I reached into a high cabinet for a plate, his hand came to rest on the small of my back, a simple, grounding touch that sent a shiver of warmth through my entire body. When I handed him the salt, our fingers were allowed to linger, to intertwine for a brief, perfect moment. The air was no longer thick with tension, but with a quiet, simmering joy. The apartment, my former museum of solitude, was transformed. It became our sanctuary. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with the comfortable presence of another person. Waking up was the best part. I had grown so accustomed to the cold, empty space beside me in bed that the solid, breathing warmth of Alex next to me felt like a miracle I got to witness every single morning. I'd wake up to the scent of his skin and the weight of his arms slung over my waist, and a profound sense of peace would settle over me, a peace I hadn't known I was missing. We fell into a new routine, one built for two. The scent of his strong, black coffee mingled with my herbal tea in the mornings. I learned the little things about him that you can only learn by sharing a life. I learned that he hummed, a low, tuneless sound, when he was sketching designs for a project. I learned that he had a small scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood bicycle accident. I learned that he was ticklish just below his ribs, a discovery that led to a breathless, laughing wrestling match on the living room floor that left us both disheveled and happy. In turn, he learned the landscape of me. He seemed to understand my need for quiet, for order, but he gently pushed at my boundaries, encouraging me out of my fortress. He didn't try to rearrange my life. He just made space for himself within it, and in doing so, made it feel bigger, brighter, more alive. He saw the anxious, overthinking parts of my brain not as a flaw, but as just another part of me, and he knew how to soothe them with a quiet word or a steadying hand. One afternoon, about a week later, I was in the shower. The steam was thick, the water hot, but the space no longer felt like a solitary sanctuary. It felt like one half of a whole. I heard the soft creak of the bathroom door and smiled to myself. I heard his footsteps, the sound of him pottering around, brushing his teeth. I turned off the water and slid the curtain back. He was standing at the sink, shirtless, a towel around his waist. He met my eyes in the mirror, his mouth full of toothpaste foam. I leaned against the doorframe of the shower, a towel wrapped around my own waist, and grinned. "Need some soap?" He spit into the sink and rinsed his mouth, a low chuckle rumbling in his chest. He turned to face me, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. He stepped forward, closing the space between us, and placed a wet, minty kiss on my lips. "Maybe later," he murmured against my mouth, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Right now, I think I'm good." The memory of that mortifying, terrifying moment was no longer a source of anxiety. It had been transformed, rewritten. It was now the first chapter of our story, a shared, private joke that belonged only to us. It was the crack in the wall that had let all the light in. Later that night, I lay awake, watching him sleep. The moonlight cast a pale, silver glow over his face, softening the strong lines of his jaw. His breathing was a slow, deep, and steady rhythm beside me, the most comforting sound in the world. I watched the rise and fall of his chest and felt a wave of emotion so powerful it almost hurt. I thought about my old life, my museum of one. It had been so carefully curated, so safe, so predictable. I had built walls so high to keep out the chaos and the pain that I had inadvertently locked out all the joy, too. My life had been a perfectly rendered graphic, technically flawless but utterly devoid of warmth, of life. Alex hadn't just walked into my apartment. He had walked into the sterile, grayscale blueprint of my existence and splashed it with vibrant, beautiful, unpredictable color. Letting him in, letting go of that rigid control, had been the most terrifying thing I had ever done. It required a vulnerability I never thought I possessed. But lying here, in the quiet dark, with his hand loosely holding mine even in his sleep, I knew it was also the most rewarding. The walls were gone. The fortress was rubble. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the chaos. I wasn't cold. I was home.